call the meeting to order at 7:09. Can we have a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Dustin Allred.
Here.
Jane Billman.
Here.
Andrew Fell.
Here.
Lou Hopkins.
Here.
Deborah McFarland.
Here.
Aaron Sims. Jonah Weisskopf. And Chi Yu. Okay.
Okay, so it looks like we have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda?
I have no changes to the agenda from the staff side.
All right. Approval of the minutes from the September 23rd, 2021 regular meeting of the Plan Commission. Are there any motions or comments on the meetings from the minutes from our last meeting?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Hopkins and a second by Mr. Fell. Any discussion of the minutes? Any changes? If not, I think we do a roll call again on this one. Mr.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes.
Then we get a roll call then.
Okay. Jane Billman.
Yes.
Andrew Fell.
Yes.
Lou Hopkins.
Yes.
Deborah McFarland.
Yes.
And Dustin Allred.
Yes. Okay, that passes. Do we have any communications?
There were 3 written communications that were forwarded on to Plan Commission for case tonight. There were no other communications received for the meeting.
So do we need to read those in or?
Has everybody had an opportunity to review those written communications? Okay. Did see a shake of a head, so I will pull one of them up. Jane, did you get a chance? Did everybody get a chance to see John Hall's email, which had been forwarded on Monday?
Yes.
Okay, I will pass on reading that one then, and I will pull up the other 2. Bear with me while I bring it up on the screen. Okay. Okay, can you see the email? Okay, this is an email from David Oliver. David Oliver Holder. He writes to oppose the proposed ordinance that will be on the agenda regarding beekeeping. It's been considered 2 times now in recent months by the Champaign County Board. Each time the ordinance proposals have been defeated, mostly recently by a vote of 6-0. It appears now on the City Planning Commission agenda with little public notice, and public comments must be in by 5 p.m. today. How can a city that goes by the moniker of Tree City and which prides itself on its environmental initiatives countenance this proposed ordinance, which is needlessly restrictive and heavy-handed? Please reject the proposed beekeeping ordinance, or at least table it so that there can be wider notice and greater public involvement in something that directly affects members of this municipality. I did respond to him just to at least let him know that the Urbana zoning ordinance does not require public notice of the review of proposed county zoning amendments, as the action, presumably because the action applies to land in the county, not in the city. I did not respond to the other items in the email. I will mention that the Champaign County Board itself has not heard this case, although the Champaign County Environmental Land Use Committee has, as has the Champaign County Zoning Board of Appeals. The second email came from Chris Graham. I'll bring that one up. Can you see this one? Okay. To the City of Urbana Planning Commission, this amendment arose from a conflict between a Prairie View subdivision resident and a neighboring beekeeper who had too many beehives. The beehives were removed 2 years ago, but this amendment continues. In the document submitted to you by Mr. John Hall, he states this is the only incident in his tenure as head of the zoning board. Also, the numerous beehives were removed 2 years ago before the amendment was proposed. The subdivision in question has a covenant which is expired. In the document submitted to you under background and information county timeline, first paragraph erroneously states he reviewed a petition from 561 persons supporting adoption of the amendment. That petition was signed by 561 persons rejecting the amendment, not supporting it. Furthermore, the documentation submitted does not include the 746 signatures collected and submitted by change.org protesting the amendment, nor the written letters submitted. On October 14th, 2021, the subcommittee received a letter from the Champaign Farm Bureau that stated the county does not have the authority to create zoning requirements for beekeeping. In Illinois, beekeepers are registered with the state, which already has bee inspectors, best practice procedures, inspections of hives and hive sites, and gives direction to hive owners and community members. This amendment was denied 3 times by county subcommittees, so now it has been submitted to you, which I am questioning. This amendment only applies to 3 subdivisions, no others. This appears to be discrimination and prejudice based on one complaint that was resolved when the overabundance of beehives was removed. Was there a public notice or a plan to inform the Urbana residents to seek their input of the proposed change if the Urbana City Planning Council decides to consider it? Signed, Chris Graham, Champaign County resident. I did respond to Chris to clarify some things for him. I believe he is also here tonight to participate in the meeting, as well as the first email that we had received from John Hall, Champaign County Department of Planning and Zoning Director. Susan Bergstrom, Senior Planner with that department, is here tonight to answer any questions or clarify anything.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ricci, for summarizing those communications. So let's move on to continued public hearings. Plan case number 2425T21, a request by the Urbana Zoning Administrator to amend the Urbana Zoning Ordinance with changes to Article 2, definitions, Article 5, use regulations, and Article 6, development regulations and other relevant sections to facilitate solar energy system installation. This case has been continued to the March 10th, 2022 regular meeting of the Plan Commission. Old business. I don't see that we have any old business. New public hearings. I don't see that we have any new public hearings this evening, which brings us to new business for this evening. And case number CCZBA 014 AT21, amend the Champaign County zoning ordinance to establish beekeeping requirements. Do we have a presentation from staff on this one tonight?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you do. Bringing that up now, and I will share my screen. Can everybody see that okay?
No, there's nothing yet.
Sorry. Have to hit that second share button. Okay, how is that?
Good.
Okay. There were corrections and clarifications made after the memo came through, which I will address during the presentation. The number of people that signed the petition supporting the amendment was actually 24, and 561 people signed a petition opposing any amendment additionally regulating beekeeping. Also, I had said in the memo that beekeeping isn't permitted by the Champaign County zoning ordinance. To clarify, Champaign County doesn't regulate beekeeping because it is considered agriculture, which is currently exempt from county zoning and allowed anywhere without limits. The Champaign County Zoning Administrator requests a text amendment to the Champaign County zoning ordinance to allow residential beekeeping as a permitted or special use in the R1 single family residence, R2 single family residence, or R3 two family residence zoning districts. The proposed text amendment is of interest to the city of Urbana because it may affect zoning and land development decisions within the city's 1.5 mile extraterritorial jurisdiction. The staff report explains how the city and county share regulatory authority in the ETJ and how the text amendment could have impacts on the city. The city has subdivision and land development jurisdiction, while the county holds zoning jurisdiction in this area, and it is important that there be consistency between these two jurisdictions where regulations may overlap. It is the Plan Commission's responsibility to review the proposed amendment to determine how it may affect the city and to recommend to City Council whether or not to protest the proposed text amendment. Under state law, a municipal protest of a proposed amendment would require a 3/4 supermajority of votes to approve the request at the county board. Otherwise, if there were no protest, a simple majority would be required. And I believe it takes only one protest from one municipality in the county to trigger that 3/4 supermajority. Staff believes that the proposed text amendment does not directly affect the use of land or affect the city's ability to manage growth and development, and recommends no protest of the proposed text amendment. The staff report goes through the timeline from the initial 2018 complaints and the later 2020 complaints, both from Prairie View subdivision residents that went to the Champaign County Environmental Land Use Committee. The draft amendment was opposed by citizens at the November 2020 ELUC meeting, and ELUC did not send it for a public hearing at the Champaign County Zoning Board of Appeals. ELUC heard more complaints again at its April 8th, 2021 meeting and reviewed a petition from 24 persons supporting adoption of an amendment for beekeeping and authorized the original draft zoning amendment for a public hearing at the CCZBA. On July 20th of 2021, Champaign County Planning staff issued its preliminary memo, which is excerpt in Exhibit A. The public hearing was opened on July 29th of 2021 and continued to 3 later meetings. At this meeting, it reviewed a petition signed by 561 persons opposing any proposed regulatory amendment. At the final meeting, the CCZBA voted 6-0 to forward the case to the county board with a preliminary recommendation for denial. ELUC will close the comment period and issue its final recommendation at its February 10th, 2022 meeting. That's tonight. The case could be heard by the Champaign County Board at its February 24th, 2022 meeting at the earliest. The full text of the final version of the amendment is included in part of Exhibit A at the ELUC agenda. The legal publication for the initial public hearing of the CCZBA summarized the original proposed zoning amendment with sections that add definitions, amends the table of uses. Let me go ahead and reshare the screen now because I actually made a slide for this. Can you see the screen again? Okay. Stop share. Share screen. There. Share. Okay. Can you see the screen? Okay. So adding definitions, adding a footnote to the table of uses, allowing beekeeping in the R1, 2, and 3 districts, but not allowing it in the R4 and R5 districts. Authorizing beekeeping only as a home occupation, which has its own set of regulations and requirements. Requiring compliance with existing state beekeeping regulation and the Champaign County nuisance ordinance. Adding a limit on the number of beehives based on lot size. Adding a minimizing separation distances between hives and property lot lines, adding required management practices like screening and water provision, adding special use provisions for having more hives on a lot, and a permit fee requirement. Again, correcting the staff report. According to Champaign County planning staff, beekeeping is considered to be agriculture, is currently exempt from county zoning, and is allowed anywhere without limit. They also contacted the Champaign County State's Attorney's Office, who determined that Champaign County may adopt regulations for beekeeping on properties in residential districts on which agriculture is not a principal use. This would appear to answer the question posed in one of the written communications stating that the Champaign County Farm Bureau gave an opinion that agriculture could not be regulated, including beekeeping. I believe the difference is that this is specifying in residential districts, it may be regulated, and that's the only zoning districts that this is being proposed in. DPZ staff determined that the proposed text amendment would not impede achievement of LRMP goals 1 through 10, and that it would improve the zoning ordinance itself because it will help achieve the purpose of the ordinance and improve the text of the ordinance. Attachment H of the preliminary memo, which is part of Exhibit A, shows areas where beekeeping would be regulated. That's on your screen here. The gray areas are City of Urbana zoned areas and the corporation limits. The blue rings are the extents of the extraterritorial jurisdictions of the various municipalities. So the one furthest to the east is the ETJ of Urbana. The one that kind of cuts through next to you in Urbana is the ETJ of the city of Champaign. And there's a third ETJ in the left side, which is actually the ETJ of Savoy. The green areas are those R1, 2, and 3 county zoned districts in unincorporated land in the county where the county proposes that beekeeping would be permitted as a home occupation. The red areas are those county zoned R5 and R4 multifamily zoning districts where the zoning amendment would not authorize beekeeping. The staff report listed a selection of 5 specific justifications from a longer list of justifications from the findings of fact listed by 2 Champaign County ZBA members for recommending denial of the proposed text amendment. The proposed amendment, again, only applies to R1, 2, and 3 zoning districts, or approximately 5.8% of the total land in the city's ETJ. Staff reviewed the proposed text amendment to identify potential land use conflicts within the city and its ETJ and found that the proposed text amendment would not affect its ability to plan or manage future development. The city does not currently regulate beekeeping through the Urbana zoning ordinance, nor through the city code. The nuisance code might apply to a situation where the magnitude or manner of a residential beekeeping activity could create a menace or threat or hazard to the general health and safety of the public. If the proposed amendment were approved, residential beekeeping could be cited in county R1, 2, or 3 zoned land and later be annexed into the city with automatic conversion of the lands to identical city zoning. As far as implications for development within the city's ETJ, within the city's municipal boundaries, the proposed amendment would not impact the use of land, nor does it affect the city's ability to manage growth and development because it does not apply within the city's boundaries. If residential beekeeping was undertaken within the ETJ, it must still comply with the proposed required management practices and the strict limits on the number of beehives on each lot. As such, staff does not anticipate a negative effect on the city's ability to plan or manage growth or development. Although the Champaign County Board of Appeals has recommended denial of the proposed zoning amendment, city staff do not believe the concerns expressed warrant a protest by the city, which would then require a supermajority by the county board to approve the amendment. Champaign County's proposed text amendment should be reviewed for consistency with the city of Urbana's comprehensive plan. Pertinent sections include promoting a balanced and compatible mix of land uses and minimizing incompatible land uses, as well as identifying and addressing issues created by overlapping jurisdictions in the ETJ. The findings are summarized in the staff report. As far as options, the Plan Commission has the following options in CCZBA case number 014 AT21, a request to amend the Champaign County zoning ordinance to allow residential beekeeping in the R1, R2, and R3 single and two family residence zoning districts. To forward the plan case to City Council with a recommendation to protest the proposed amendment, or forward the plan case to the City Council with a recommendation to protest the proposed amendment contingent upon specific provisions to be identified, or forward the plan case to the City Council with a recommendation to not protest the proposed amendment. Based on the findings in the staff report, staff recommends that the Plan Commission forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to not protest the proposed amendment. And that is the end of my staff report. Again, Susan Bergstrom is here to answer questions from Champaign County, as well as there being some speakers, at least one who's identified that they would like to participate in the meeting. And I am happy to take any questions.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Ricci. Any questions from Plan Commission for Mr. Ricci? Mr. Hopkins.
I want to be clear about something you alluded to, but maybe not precisely enough. If any currently county parcel were annexed to the city of Urbana, in general, there is a easy transfer to equivalent zoning categories. But
Correct.
when that occurred, this part of the county zoning ordinance, if it were passed, would no longer apply to R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, or their equivalents in the city. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And I guess presumably if there were an issue and say this was a revenue generating enterprise that the person, was operating, then with sort of annexation agreement, terms would be negotiated to, address that and allow that to continue under the
Okay, wait a minute. My understanding at the moment is there is nothing in the Urbana Code or the Urbana zoning ordinance that regulates beekeeping.
That's correct.
So anything anybody was doing in the county, even if it didn't meet this proposed amendment to the county's ordinance, would have no effect in the city. The person could continue.
Yes.
Person could even do things they couldn't do until they were annexed.
Yes.
And it could happen in our R4 and our R5.
Yes. Under city code.
I just want to be clear about how this relates to city zoning. There is no
Yes.
city code that says I can't keep bees in my house, at my house.
That's correct. Sorry.
And there is no city code that says I can't do it unless I'm qualified as a home occupation.
That's correct.
I can do it just like I can plant an apple tree in my backyard.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Was the county wishing to speak, or were they just here to answer questions?
Hi, this is Susan Bergstrom. I'm just here to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, great. So it's a little unclear to me about public input in this type of case. Do we open it up to public input as part of discussion of this case, or is the public input limited to audience participation at this point more generally?
Well,
Not a public
that's
hearing.
a good question, because and I realized as you passed by this on the public hearing part, and that it's not public hearing. I think, I'm not really sure. I will defer to anybody who could speak to it, maybe Mr. Hopkins or Mr. Fell or Ms. Billman or anybody else, or even Ms. Trouter.
I mean, I'm happy to allow public comment. I'm just asking more procedurally if there's anything specifically we need to do.
I think
Mr. Hopkins.
clarifying. Yeah.
My suggestion is that we recognize that there are no required procedures in our bylaws for this because it is not a public hearing, but that we take the initiative to allow people to speak because they have shown up with the expectation that they can speak. And we can apply our usual norms of allowed time limits and whatever we need to if necessary.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I'm in agreement. We should let people say what they came to say. So should we treat this like a public hearing in terms of audience participation at this point?
From the staff side, that makes sense. If you wanted to do proponents and then opponents, and then perhaps an opportunity for Ms. Bergstrom to respond to those comments if there are things that need to be clarified or corrected.
Okay, sounds good. So as Mr. Hopkins said, even though this is not something that's required by our bylaws, we'll open it up for public comment at this point. So we'll ask that anyone in favor can address the commission, then anyone opposed can address the commission. And at the end, if the county wants to respond to any of the comments, we'll give them a chance to do that. So if you are interested in speaking in favor of the amendment, you can raise your hand. Give it a second here, but I'm not seeing any raised hands. Am I correct?
I'm not seeing any raised hands as proponents either.
All right, so we'll move on to those who are opposed. Anyone that's opposed that wishes to address the commission, if you could raise your hand and we'll go down the list. So I see a Chris Graham, Ryan Shosted, and a Krista Weiss. And if you could, when you address the commission, just state your name for the record. Yep, we could hear you briefly. Chris Graham. Looks like you're muted. Can you unmute yourself or?
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you're unmuted now.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank Marcus Ritchie for responding and writing me a letter trying to explain city politics to me, which is still terribly unclear. I guess one of my big concerns is this is restricting beekeeping in 3 subdivisions, basically. And I don't think that's the way things ought to be done. I think that's sort of prejudice. And this thing where you accept the amendment and pass it on doesn't make sense, and it's not clear to me. There's obviously lots of public opinion in the previous meetings. So I'm more confused now than I was to begin with, I think. So thank you for your time. And I don't know that I have anything else to say. I mean, it was, I don't know. So there you have it.
Okay. I think when I read the comments, it seemed like there was still some confusion about exactly what Plan Commission and the city were doing. Did you want to try and clarify that maybe a little more, Mr. Ricci? Or
I can certainly try. So the purpose of Plan Commission and City Council in this case is under state law, City Council can submit a protest of any proposed zoning amendments, whether it's a rezoning or a text amendment like this beekeeping amendment. The city's focuses on how the amendment impacts the city, not necessarily the entire county, because the city doesn't choose to impose its will or opinions or feelings on the entire county. So it focuses on how the proposed amendment will impact the city itself, either inside its current corporation limits or within the extraterritorial 1.5 mile borderland around the city. In this case, the zoning amendment has no impact in corporation limits because it only is proposing to regulate beekeeping in the county. The gray area is that 1.5 miles around the city that's in the county right now could eventually be annexed in the city. So we have to worry about things happening in that 1.5 mile area that could then become a city issue. In this case, only 6% of the land in that 1.5 mile border area is zoned R1, 2, or 3. So only that 6% of the land in our borderland is being changed by this amendment. And in this case, the amendment is only seeking to regulate things that the city doesn't regulate. It's not allowing somebody to do something that the city would be regulating or opposed to anyways. So the proposed amendment would not have much impact on what the city would normally be opposed to or already regulating. And yes, it would impact some of that land, but the impact isn't significant enough or negative enough that the city, that staff feel that city council should require the county board to vote a 2/3 majority rather than only a 50% majority and make that decision as only one of several jurisdictions in the county. If there were a bigger impact, we might say, yes, you should protest that amendment. But in this case, we don't. That doesn't mean that the county can't deny it. The county board can say, no, we don't want this amendment. And the CCZBA has already recommended that. By us saying, we don't think you should protest it, that just allows the county machine to do what it wants to do without being influenced by city decisions.
Great. Thanks for the clarification, Mr. Ricci. Okay, so let's continue with the comment from those who wish to address us and are opposed to the amendment. So I have a Ryan Shosted that's up next.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, well, good evening. My name is Ryan Shosted. I'm a resident of Urbana and a local beekeeper. I'm also a former officer of the Eastern Illinois Beekeepers Association. I thank you for your service to the city where I live, work, and raise bees, largely for the benefit of my neighbors and friends in our community. I speak in opposition to the beekeeping ordinances proposed in this case. I respectfully ask you to recommend protest of the amendment. May I speak for a moment personally as someone who's been involved in this process longer than I believe any of those whom I am addressing have been. This has been a long and arduous process for members of the beekeeping community, and I think we've already heard another member of that community express her frustration and dismay with the situation before us. This is like kind of one of those bad dreams that just keeps repeating itself. We've been in a defensive posture for nearly 2 years now, trying to defend what is essentially a harmless and even environmentally beneficial activity that has gone on in the county for a very, very long time without any kind of regulation. We're upset, but we're going to continue to express our dismay with this situation to our elected leaders and ask you to please look at this from our point of view. So if I may continue my remarks for a moment. Do you have a time limit that you're aware of so I can know how to edit my remarks? 5 minutes, according to Ms. Billman. All right, I will do my best. So I understand that this ordinance affects properties outside the city limits. Nonetheless, it is still objectionable and entirely worthy of your careful consideration as public servants. I believe that once regulation of beekeeping becomes law in these outlying areas, beekeeping within city limits will be impacted eventually by the same ordinances. Are you willing to assure local beekeepers, naturalists, gardeners, and friends of the environment that once enacted, the current ordinance will not be used as a pretext for regulating beekeeping within city limits? Certainly, that's beyond your power to do, and I understand that. That's why I ask you to act within the realm of the possible and use your authority to protest the amendment now before it proceeds. It is all too likely that if you do not protest the amendment, there will eventually be a bid to standardize beekeeping regulations across the city and then the county, citing your vote tonight as evidence that it has broad support. It does not. Sooner than later, we will be back where we were before the County Zoning Board of Appeals defeated the ordinance in a 6-0 unanimous vote in December 2021. Please don't put local beekeepers through this again. We have already been fighting these ordinances for several years, and it's beginning to feel like we are all caught in double or even triple jeopardy. The proposed boundaries for regulation are confusing and complex. I believe this will be argued in future bids to normalize beekeeping regulation across the city and/or county. If accepted by the city of Urbana now, it is all but certain the ordinances will come before the city and county over and over again until they are ubiquitous and standardized across the entire county. This has been our experience over the last 2 years. Well, why is this happening? Well, because the current proposal is confusing. The confusion over who lives in restricted and non-restricted areas and what exactly makes those areas worthy of restriction was likely among the reasons the County Zoning Board of Appeals defeated the proposal. If you do not protest the amendment or recommend its protest or whatever the verbiage is, the natural consequence is that the ordinance will be standardized at some point, using your vote tonight as precedent. The problem of confusing boundaries has not been dealt with in the current version of the proposal. To be frank, I don't think it can be dealt with in a more straightforward manner because at this stage it would be far too unpopular to regulate beekeeping in any large, easily defined swath of the city or county. For this and other reasons, this amendment is an excellent example of the camel in the tent metaphor, often used in discussions of public policy. I'm sure you've heard it before. Small, seemingly innocuous decisions lead to greater, undesirable consequences. This amendment represents the camel's nose, and local beekeepers, naturalists, and friends of the environment, of which there are many, recognize it for what it is. I urge you to contemplate the potential ramifications of this amendment from the point of view of local beekeepers, among other friends of the environment. Local beekeepers are exhausted and demoralized by numerous public hearings over the past several years to discuss potential restrictions on their peaceful, harmless, and environmentally beneficial activities. We worked hard, and those proposals were defeated. But what once was a paradise for beekeepers, municipalities that encourage pollinators and honeybees at every level, has turned into a nightmare of anxiety and uncertainty. Local beekeepers have been put in a continual posture of defense despite the conflicting arguments surrounding a single dispute in one subdivision. Potential beekeepers have likely already been discouraged by concerns arising from whether or not they live or will move into a restricted area. By not resolving this once and for all and returning to the status quo, as unanimously recommended by the County Zoning Board of Appeals and ELUC, and aligned with the overwhelming public acclamation against the proposed ordinances defeated in December, our city leaders will, perhaps unintentionally, be sowing further doubt and uncertainty surrounding the legality of beekeeping in Champaign County. As law-abiding citizens, beekeepers will naturally be concerned about the location of boundaries, and more importantly, they will be wary of the next steps in regulating their activities. Uncertainty, as you know, is antithetical to growth and investment in beekeeping, just as in the wider economy. By not protesting this amendment, or recommending its protest, or what have you, our leaders will inject further uncertainty into Champaign County beekeeping. This will have undesirable consequences for local beekeeping and will negatively impact local agriculture and the environment in ways that are evidently on the minds of many Urbana voters. Further uncertainty will reduce the number of beekeepers and the number of bees in the city of Urbana. It's up to you to decide what happens next. Non-beekeeper neighbors I have spoken with are absolutely astonished that this amendment is being considered by our local leaders. What on earth are they thinking? Asked one friend. By failing to protest or recommend the protest of this amendment, the perception quite simply will be that our city leaders are in fact in favor of regulating beekeeping. Is that really what Urbana wants to be known for? That is certainly not a popular view among the residents of our Tree City, USA. And more importantly, it is in no way merited by safety conditions on the ground, as has been thoroughly discussed at multiple meetings of the County Zoning Board of Appeals last year. Believe me, I know, I was there. In addition, I personally cannot discern any principle behind the decision to regulate specific areas scattered around city limits. Is there something special about these sites that makes them particularly vulnerable or risky for beekeeping activities? In summary, as a resident homeowner and registered voter in the city of Urbana, I respectfully urge you to protest the amendment on the grounds that, 1, once enacted, it will become precedent and eventually make it easier for future regulation of beekeeping within city boundaries and elsewhere in the county. 2, the uncertainty regarding this ordinance in all of its various incarnations already depresses and will continue to depress local beekeeping activities. 3, the ordinance is confusing insofar as the proposed zones of regulation are scattered and have complex boundaries. Because of this, The ordinance is ripe for future standardization, and this will ultimately impact beekeeping throughout the city and the county. 4. The justification for targeting a number of different areas around the outskirts of the city is still unclear. I thank you all for all that you do to serve the residents of the city of Urbana, and once more respectfully ask you to recommend protest of the amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your comments. Ms. Billman?
Can I ask Ryan a question?
Sure.
I don't know if he's still on. Ryan, are you still there?
Yes, I believe so. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can. Yeah, are you a beekeeper in Urbana now?
I am.
And you have them in your yard?
Yes.
And you're in like the center city, not on the very outskirts?
I am not affected by one of the zones that's one of the, as Mr. Ricci has said, in the 6% of the county, no.
And neighbors they've not complained?
Oh my heavens. In fact, at the previous meeting, some of my neighbors have participated and have pointed out what a joy it is to have bees in the neighborhood. Turns out that in Urbana, people like their flowers, they like their trees, and they like bees doing the pollination.
Thank you.
All right. Should we move on to, I see Krista Weiss is the next in line. You might need to unmute yourself, Krista. Krista, can you hear us? I think you have to unmute yourself so we can hear you.
Hello, I'm sorry. As many times as I use this, I'm still always like, I'm going to have a hard time saying anything other than what Ryan said. I heartily agree with him. I am an Urbana beekeeper, 6 years. I've been in the SEBA club for that many years. I truly believe that our future exists only with the help of the insects and the other pollinators on this planet. I am trying to help. I started a pollinator garden at Wiley School in Urbana with the help of many teachers and local people there to help educate our next generation of young people to care why they should care about their environment and their neighborhood. I agree with that there is some confusion. Like, this definitely came out of the blue, and really confused the local bee club as to why this is even an issue, because we understand that Urbana is an agricultural area, but it's also a city, and it's filled with a lot of people who are like-minded. So when it came about that this was even presented, it just was confusing, like the way that it's written. Even the memorandum that was written, it kind of was written, and we thought that it said 561 other people came out to protest against beekeeping, when actually 561 people came out to say, hey, we appreciate that there are beekeepers around. And that, so that was confusing. And I think that really helped to stir the pot as to why we showed up tonight. We appreciate that you're even considering looking at this and talking about it. And, but as Ryan said, I think, but Mr. Hopkins clarified that, like, even if it does pass in the county, and these areas do get annexed into the city, that those will then fall under the city ordinances and not the the county. So I think that helped to clarify that a little bit. And at least the people that live in the city of Urbana and even those annexed areas would then fall under those ordinances and not be restricted. But I live in a small, my property is small, and looking at those restrictions that they recommended, I don't even know what I would do with my beehive. Like, I would have to put it on top of my house or something to keep it far enough away from any of my neighbors' properties, because I live in a very small area. And I've never encountered any trouble with neighbors. All the beekeepers I know are very respectful of their neighbors. They will, if they're going to put a new hive in or something, they will always send letters out to the neighbors, or at least go and talk to the neighbors and say, hey, how do you feel about this? You know, I had a neighbor that said, I have allergies, so I would appreciate if you didn't put a beehive on this side of the property. If you could put it on the other side of the property, I would appreciate it. And I always consider like the way that my bees are flying, so that I don't want them going in, you know, directly into their yard. I would rather have them go up. So we always like consider other people before we do things. So I'm just, as Ryan said, I'm worried that like one little step in a direction of like really strong enforcement of something would just set a precedent. And then once that ball is rolling, we all just worry. So I'm sorry if I rambled on a little bit, but my thoughts, I didn't write anything out. So I'm just more reactive to this, and I appreciate your time and listening and consideration. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your comments. So let's move on to Kirk Sanders.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm an Urbana resident. I'm not a beekeeper, but I would like to see the city protest this ordinance as well. I guess I don't have much to add to what Ryan Shosted said, beyond my fear that this is the sort of thin edge of a wedge, right? That there's always pressure towards standardization within the county and the cities within the county. So, you know, if the county adopts an ordinance that covers land adjacent to Urbana, and then Urbana may annex or not annex, I mean, there will be pressures if it's enacted anywhere to standardize toward the restrictions that are included anywhere. I see no need for the ordinance. It doesn't seem to me to be responding to any actual problems on the ground. If it is adopted in the county, that will then put pressure in the future on adoption in the cities to standardize, right? And the pressure won't work in the opposite direction. The county will have enacted an ordinance, right? And it's not going to reverse itself then because the cities don't want it, but there will be pressure on the cities to standardize as well. So this just seems a sort of backhanded way of pushing toward down the road adopting similar restrictions within Urbana. So if the city doesn't want to see those restrictions within the city itself, it should protest their adoption in the county, I think, as well. And I'd like to see the city protest this to require at least a supermajority in the county to adopt it.
Okay, thanks for your comments. So I see the next person is Chris Graham.
You already allowed me to speak. Thank you. Is my hand up? Oh, shoot. Sorry. I'm good at this.
I think that's all of the people who wanted to speak, Mr. Ryan.
I think Chris Graham got ejected prematurely. Maybe we can let them back in.
Thank you for your time and consideration, but you already let me speak.
Oh,
So I just can't handle the little button. Sorry.
Sorry, I got it. I was confused. Okay. Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in opposition to the amendment? All right. Seeing no one else, we'll close out the public input portion here and go into discussion and possibly entertain a motion to vote. So is there any discussion of the amendment? Mr. Fell. You're muted.
Unmute.
Sorry, thought it was. Part of this, I don't want to I'll say take objection to what Mr. Ricci said, but I absolutely care what happens in the ETJ a lot. And I think the city cares what happens in the ETJ a lot, or I wouldn't be here. And as the ETJ member, I would much prefer to encourage beekeeping in my part of the county rather than discourage it. And it seems like that is nearly a universally held opinion. So while I understand possibly making the county's job easier, that's not our role here. My job here is to vote what I believe this should be voted, and whether it's a big issue or not, I think it's pretty clear what I'll say the constituents in a majority would like to have happen here. So I personally, I think it's something that the city of Urbana should do everything they can to encourage and not discourage. So that's all I need to say right now.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Fell. I realize I should have let Ms. Bergstrom respond to some of the comments that we heard from the public before we went into discussion. So let's do that, and then we can resume our discussion after that.
Thanks. I appreciate your time tonight. I just wanted to kind of reiterate what Marcus said earlier, how our process at the county can be a little overwhelming and also a little confusing. So I wanted to just back up a little bit and say that the December meeting where the Zoning Board of Appeals met, they made a recommendation for denial, but they don't have the power to deny a text amendment. So they are the first step in our process. So they made a recommendation that the county board deny the text amendment, so that because the zoning board felt like there was no need to regulate beekeeping. And then the second step was for it to go to ELUC. And the Environment and Land Use Committee, in its first of 2 meetings, also made a recommendation to deny the text amendment. So they too were saying that there was no need to regulate beekeeping. But they are required to have 2 meetings, and the second meeting is tonight. So I can't say how it played out, but they already did make their recommendation for denial of the text amendment in January. The third step would be for the full county board to consider this, and that's where the determinations of any municipality and any other people who might protest come into play. And my feeling is that we are on track right now with both the ZBA and the county and ELUC recommending denial. That it would be highly unusual for the county board to adopt this amendment that regulates beekeeping. They would be going against what the 2 subcommittees talked about if they were to do that. So in my humble opinion, even if the city of Urbana does not like the idea of regulating beekeeping, I do not believe that a protest should be made that is going to create a supermajority vote, because that will just create a more complicated voting process for something that already might be well on track to be denied anyway. I don't know if that helps or makes things more confusing, but I did feel the need to say how our process works.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Bergstrom. It helps to hear the process explained in more detail. Were there any questions from Commission for Ms. Bergstrom? Mr. Hopkins?
When you say makes the voting more complicated, the only thing it actually does is change the criterion for adoption, correct?
Correct. It makes it so that more people need to have a vote. It would become
For it to pass.
For it to pass, right?
Yes. Okay. And that's all the complication we're talking about.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
And I wanted to clarify, I think at one point in time I said a 2/3 majority, and it's actually 3/4 majority requirement.
Okay, thanks for the clarification, Mr. Ricci. Okay, should we go back into discussion then? So, any other members of the commission have something to say? Mr. Hopkins.
So, context. I understand why this is in front of us. It's a procedural item, as Susan Bergstrom just explained, that even though their process in the county is heading toward rejection of this proposed amendment, they still have to come to the city by state law, as Marcus explained, as part of the process going forward. And I can understand the recommendation from staff, because by the usual concerns for a county zoning text amendment affecting the ETJ, this does not fit those usual concerns. But I am going to make a motion that we do protest. And I'll give a little background why. First, I should admit that my son keeps bees in a residential neighborhood in another city. The things that bother me about this ordinance, not actually as much the camel nose under the tent issue, are the following. If you look at the map that Marcus displayed, and you understand what Andrew Fell was just talking about, the mix of what's in the city, what's out of the city, what might be annexed, what might not be annexed, and the strategy of the Urbana Comprehensive Plan of how we intend to treat the northeast edge of the city, which, although I don't have the plan open in front of me, has some word annotations about the intent for that part of the city and its ETJ area. Beekeeping would be completely compatible, if not essential, to that notion. So it seems to me we do have a reason and some backing in our plan to say that this kind of ordinance in such a chopped up in-city, out-of-city, ag zoning, not ag zoning, annexation, not annexation, really does affect our ability to plan and manage, which gives us the logic to protest this. The final thing I would say is, I think the ordinance itself has several problems. One is that it defines beekeeping as a home occupation. And many beekeepers in residential areas are not doing it as a home occupation. That would link it to potential home occupation ordinances or regulations. So I think that link in a way is maybe the camel's nose under the tent issue that would concern me more than some of the rest. So I would move that the Plan Commission send case, and I don't have the number in front of me,
CCZ BA014AT21
to the City Council with a recommendation to protest.
I'll second that.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Hopkins and a second by Mr. Fell. Any further discussion? All right, should we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Mr. Fell,
Yes.
Mr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Ms. McFarland,
Yes.
and, Mr. Allred,
Yes.
and Ms. Billman.
Yes.
All right, so that motion passes. Do we have a date for council for that one, Mr. Ricci?
Yes. I believe it will go to council this coming Monday.
Okay. All right, let's move on to audience participation. Is there anyone who wishes to address the Plan Commission for 4 minutes uninterrupted on a topic of your choice? If so, if you could raise your hand and we can promote you to a guest.
I do not see any raised hands other than Ms. Graham's.
But I think that's
I assume.
newly raised this time, isn't it? Or am
I
I
don't-
wrong?
I don't
Yes,
know if it,
Chris Graham just raised her hand.
Unmute. Okay. Unmute.
Okay, you're unmuted. You have 4 minutes to address the commission. I think you have muted yourself this time.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll say it for the third time. I really appreciate everyone there having common sense and using it. Thank you very much. That's it.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else? I can't see the participants anymore. Let's see.
there are no other raised hands.
Okay. So we will close out audience participation and move on to the staff report. Do we have a staff report?
There is no staff report.
And do we have a study session?
There is no study session.
Closed session. The closed session item to consider security procedures pursuant to 5 ILCS 120 is going to be continued to the next in-person meeting of the Plan Commission, which means that we are adjourned at 8:18.
Thank you very much.